Notice the breath moving through you right now. Not your breath, the breath. It arrives without permission, leaves without asking. Your chest rises and falls with a rhythm older than memory, older than the name you carry, older than every story you've constructed about who you are supposed to be. There is something beneath the surface of your carefully managed life. Something you've been running from since before you had language to name it. Not a demon. Not a flaw. Something far more dangerous than that. The truth. What if everything you believe about yourself, every quality you claim, every virtue you defend, every weakness you apologize for, what if all of it is a magnificent lie? Not a malicious deception, but a survival mechanism so sophisticated you've forgotten it was ever constructed. You're wearing a mask. But here's what makes this unbearable. You've been wearing it so long, you think the mask is your face. Carl Jung called this the persona, the acceptable self, the version of you that learned to navigate a world that demanded conformity as the price of belonging. And beneath it, the shadow, everything you rejected, denied, buried alive in the basement of your psyche because it was too dangerous, too raw, too real to be allowed into the light. This isn't theory. This is the architecture of your suffering. If you're still here, if something in you recognizes this discomfort as truth rather than threat, then stay. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I'm asking, but because you're recognizing something you've always known but never had permission to speak. We're going deeper into the places most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The places where transformation actually lives. Because here's what nobody tells you about awakening. It doesn't happen in the light. It happens in the dark. In the parts of yourself you've been taught to fear. You're standing at a threshold now. On one side, the familiar exhaustion of pretending. On the other, something you can't yet name but can already feel. The question is simple. Are you willing to see what you've been hiding from yourself? Before language, there was only sensation. The warmth of approval washing over your skin like sunlight. The cold withdrawal when you expressed something deemed unacceptable. A chill that penetrated deeper than temperature, settling into your nervous system as a warning. You were born whole, undivided. A pure expression of being that hadn't yet learned to fragment itself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. The infant doesn't perform. The toddler doesn't calculate. There is hunger, and the hunger is expressed. There is rage, and the rage moves through without apology. There is desire, and the desire reaches. But then came the education. Not in classrooms, though that came later. The first education happened in glances. In the tightening of a parent's jaw when you expressed too much need. In the sudden warmth that flooded the room when you performed compliance. Your nervous system, that ancient instrument of survival, began taking notes. Asterisk, when I show this, I am safe. When I show that, I am in danger. Asterisk, consider a specific moment, though you may not remember it consciously. You're 4 years old. You express anger, pure, uncomplicated fury at having a toy taken away. But instead of the anger being met, acknowledged, allowed to move through and dissolve naturally, you encounter something else. Silence. A parent's face closing like a door. The room temperature dropping 10 degrees in an instant. Your nervous system registers this as a threat to survival. Because for a child, abandonment isn't just emotional pain. It's a biological emergency. You are utterly dependent. Rejection equals death at the level of the primitive brain. So you learn. Not through conscious decision, but through the body's intelligence. Anger is dangerous. Anger threatens connection. Anger must be eliminated. But here's the problem. You can't eliminate anger. You can only bury it. The construction begins. Layer by layer, year by year, you build what Jung termed the persona, the mask that interfaces with the world. And this mask is not pathology. This is crucial to understand. The persona saved your life. It allowed you to navigate a world that demanded certain expressions and punished others. It gave you belonging when belonging was survival. You learned to be polite when you felt rage, agreeable when you felt resistance, modest when you felt powerful, small when you felt expansive. The persona became so sophisticated, so seamless, that eventually you forgot you were wearing it. This is the first great forgetting. But the parts you rejected didn't disappear. The anger you deemed unacceptable didn't evaporate. The desire you learned to be ashamed of didn't dissolve. The ambition you were taught to hide behind false humility didn't vanish. The need you discovered was too much didn't shrink to an acceptable size. All of it sank, down into the basement of your psyche, into what Jung called the shadow, not because it's evil, but because it exists outside the light of your conscious awareness. It's everything you decided you are not, which means it contains everything you actually are, but cannot admit. The shadow is alive. It doesn't sit quietly in the dark, waiting to be discovered. It presses against the walls of your constructed identity. It leaks out in moments when your defenses are down. It appears in your dreams wearing unfamiliar faces. It emerges in your judgments of others. Every quality you condemn with unusual venom is a quality you've exiled from your own self-concept. You see arrogance in others and feel righteous disgust, never noticing how you've suppressed your own confidence into something you call humility, but is actually self-erasure. You judge neediness in others with contempt, blind to how you've starved your own legitimate needs until they've become a desperate, hidden hunger. You mock ambition in others as shallow, unable to recognize how you've buried your own drive under layers of spiritual bypassing. This is projection, the shadow's primary language. And somewhere in your 20s or 30s or 40s, something begins to shift. The persona that once felt like protection begins to feel like confinement. The mask that saved you starts to suffocate you. You can't name it yet, but you feel it, a growing sense that you are living someone else's life, that you are performing a role you never consciously chose. You achieve the things you were supposed to achieve. You maintain the relationships you were supposed to maintain. You present the image you were supposed to present. And beneath it all, a question begins to whisper, quiet at first, then louder. Is this all there is? Not in the sense of wanting more accomplishments. Something deeper. A recognition that you have spent decades constructing an identity, and that identity feels increasingly hollow. Like a building with impressive architecture, but no one living inside. You look in the mirror and see a stranger. Not because you've changed, but because you're finally noticing that the face you show the world isn't the face you wear in the dark, alone, when no one is watching and there's no performance required. The exhaustion begins here. Not physical tiredness, though that comes too. A psychic exhaustion. The grinding fatigue of maintaining a false self. Of monitoring every word, every expression, every impulse to ensure it aligns with the persona you've spent a lifetime constructing. Your shoulders carry tension you can't release. Your jaw clenches in your sleep. There's a knot in your stomach that you've learned to call normal. A low hum of anxiety that never quite disappears, even in moments that should be peaceful. You might seek solutions. Therapy that teaches you to manage symptoms, but never questions the fundamental structure. Meditation that helps you tolerate the discomfort, but doesn't address its source. Self-help that offers new strategies for the same old persona to become more effective at being false. And none of it touches the core, because the core issue isn't that you're doing something wrong. The core issue is that you're not doing anything at all. The real you, the whole, undivided, unedited you, has been locked away for so long that you've forgotten it exists. The persona has become a prison, and you are both the prisoner and the guard. But something is shifting. You're reading these words, and something in you is recognizing itself. Not agreeing intellectually, recognition is deeper than agreement. It's the feeling of being seen in a way you haven't allowed yourself to be seen. Of having something named that you've felt, but never had language for. This is the beginning of awakening. Not the blissful, transcendent awakening sold in spiritual marketplaces. The real awakening. The one that begins with recognition and moves through discomfort into something you can't yet imagine. You're beginning to feel the weight of the mask. The cost of the performance. The exhaustion of the exile you've imposed on half of yourself. And you're beginning to feel the difference between the life you're living and the life that wants to live through you. The tension in your shoulders isn't just muscle. It's held emotion. Decades of unexpressed truth calcified into physical form. The knot in your stomach isn't just stress. It's the body's intelligence trying to tell you something your mind refuses to hear. You've learned to call this normal. The baseline anxiety that colors every interaction. The vague sense of inadequacy that no achievement can quite erase. The depression that arrives without obvious cause, settling over you like fog. Not dramatic enough to be called crisis, but persistent enough to drain the color from everything. These are not failures. These are not evidence of weakness. These are messengers. Your psyche is trying to get your attention. It has been trying for years, perhaps decades. But you've been trained to silence the messenger, to pathologize the signal, to treat the symptom while ignoring the source. Consider what happens when you suppress an emotion. Not just avoid expressing it, actually push it down, deny its existence, refuse to let it move through you. The emotion doesn't disappear. Energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. So where does it go? Into your body, into your dreams, into your projections, into sudden, inexplicable reactions that seem disproportionate to their triggers, into addictions, not just to substances, but to work, to achievement, to being needed, to staying busy enough that you never have to sit still with yourself. The rage you buried at 4 years old is still there. It hasn't aged. It hasn't matured. It's frozen at the moment of rejection, waiting. And it leaks out in passive aggression you don't recognize as aggression. In chronic resentment you've learned to call discernment. In a cutting edge to your humor that you tell yourself is just honesty. The need you learned was too much is still there. It emerges in relationships where you give endlessly, never asking, slowly building a resentment so deep you can't trace its origin. Or it inverts. You become fiercely independent, proud of needing no one, unable to see how this strength is actually terror of vulnerability wearing a more acceptable costume. The desire you were taught to be ashamed of is still there. It shows up in fantasies you'd never admit, in attractions you judge yourself for feeling, in a hunger that frightens you with its intensity, so you starve it until it becomes something twisted, something you barely recognize. This is the cost of the persona. Not just what you've lost, but what you've created in the dark. Because the shadow doesn't just contain the parts you rejected. It contains those parts transformed by years of denial, fermented in darkness, grown strange and powerful in their exile. Jung understood this. He wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The longer you deny the shadow, the more power it accumulates. The more it operates outside your awareness, the more it controls you. You think you're in charge of your life, making conscious choices, but you're being driven by forces you refuse to acknowledge. Every time you judge someone with unusual intensity, the shadow is speaking. Every time you have a reaction that seems disproportionate, the shadow is leaking through. Every time you sabotage yourself in ways you can't explain, the shadow is acting. You are not in control. You are being controlled by the parts of yourself you refuse to see. And here's where it gets truly uncomfortable. The very qualities you've built your identity around, the things you're most proud of, the virtues you claim, these are often just the inverse of your shadow. Not genuine qualities, but compensations. Defenses against what you fear you actually are. You pride yourself on being easygoing. But beneath that, a rage so intense you've had to bury it under layers of forced flexibility. You identify as humble. But beneath that, an ambition so fierce it terrified you into its opposite. You see yourself as independent. But beneath that, a need so vast you've had to armor yourself against it. The persona and the shadow are not separate. They are two sides of the same coin. The persona is what you show. The shadow is what you hide. But both are reactions to the same wound. The moment you learned that being whole was not safe. This is the paradox that breaks people open. You cannot heal by becoming more of what you think you should be. You can only heal by integrating what you've decided you are not. But integration sounds gentle. It sounds like a peaceful process of self-acceptance. And sometimes it is. But often it's not. Often, integration requires you to face the thing you've spent your entire life running from. What if the answer to your suffering lives in the very place you've been most afraid to look? What if your depression isn't a chemical imbalance to be medicated away, but your psyche's way of forcing you to stop, to descend, to finally face what you've been fleeing? What if your anxiety isn't a disorder to be managed, but an intelligent signal that you're living out of alignment with your actual nature? What if the parts of yourself you've exiled contain the very qualities you need to become whole? The rage you rejected holds your necessary boundaries. The greed you shamed contains your will to survive and thrive. The lust you repressed holds your vital life force. The pride you crushed contains your legitimate self-worth. The need you starved holds your capacity for genuine intimacy. But you can't access these qualities while they remain in shadow. You can't integrate what you refuse to see. You can't heal what you won't acknowledge. And so the suffering continues. The exhaustion deepens. The sense of living someone else's life becomes unbearable. You look at your accomplishments and feel nothing. You look at your relationships and wonder if anyone actually knows you. You look in the mirror and see a performance that's been running so long you've forgotten there was ever anything else. This is the crisis point. The moment when the persona can no longer hold. When the mask begins to crack not because you're choosing to remove it, but because the pressure from beneath has become too great. Some people reach this point through external crisis, a divorce, a death, a diagnosis, a failure too large to be explained away. The structures of their life collapse, and in the rubble, they're forced to confront what was always underneath. Others reach it through internal erosion. No dramatic event, just a slow wearing away of the will to continue pretending. A morning when they wake up and simply cannot put the mask back on, cannot perform the role one more time, cannot maintain the lie for another day. This is what spiritual traditions call the dark night of the soul. What psychology calls ego death. What ordinary language calls a breakdown. But here's what nobody tells you. The breakdown is not the problem. The breakdown is the breakthrough trying to happen. You are at this edge now. Maybe you've been here for months, for years, circling this recognition without fully landing in it. Maybe you arrived here suddenly, shocked to find yourself in a place you never imagined you'd be. Either way, you're here, at the threshold where the old way of being can no longer continue, but the new way hasn't yet revealed itself. This is the most dangerous moment, not because of what might happen, but because of what you might do to avoid what needs to happen. You might reach for another strategy, another technique, another way to make the persona more effective. You might seek comfort, reassurance, a way to make this discomfort go away without actually changing anything fundamental. But if you're truly ready, if some part of you recognizes that there is no going back, only through, then what comes next is not more suffering, but the beginning of its end. The shadow is not your enemy. It never was. It's the part of you that's been waiting in the dark, holding everything you rejected, keeping it safe until you were finally ready to come home to yourself. And it's pressing against the walls of your consciousness now, not to destroy you, but to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated back into the wholeness you were born with and learned to fragment. The question is no longer whether you'll face the shadow. The question is whether you'll face it consciously, with awareness and intention, or whether it will continue to control you from the dark. There is a place within you that you've been avoiding, not a metaphorical place, an actual territory of your inner landscape that you've learned to navigate around, the way you'd walk around a hole in the ground you know is there but refuse to look into. You're going to look now, not because I'm telling you to, because you're ready, because the cost of not looking has finally exceeded the fear of what you might see. Close your eyes if you're in a place where that's safe, or simply soften your gaze, let your attention turn inward. Notice the breath again, that ancient rhythm that continues whether you're paying attention or not. And now, without forcing anything, without trying to make something happen, simply notice. Is there a feeling in your body that you've been avoiding? A sensation you've learned to override, to push past, to numb? Maybe it's in your chest, a tightness, a heaviness, something that feels like grief, but you've never given it permission to be grief. Maybe it's in your throat, words that have been stuck there for years, decades, a lifetime. Maybe it's in your gut, a churning, a knowing, an intelligence you've been trained to distrust. Don't try to change it. Don't try to understand it yet. Just notice it's there. This is the doorway. The shadow doesn't appear as a concept. It appears as sensation, as image, as the face of someone you judge with unusual intensity. It appears in your dreams wearing masks, sometimes as a threatening figure, sometimes as someone you desire, sometimes as a version of yourself you don't recognize. Jung wrote about this. He said the shadow often appears in dreams as a figure of the same gender, someone who embodies the qualities you've rejected. For some, it's a violent figure, representing the aggression they've suppressed. For others, it's a seductive figure, representing the desire they've shamed. For others still, it's a weak figure, representing the vulnerability they've armored against. But here's what's crucial. The shadow is not your enemy. It's not a demon to be exorcised. It's a part of you that's been exiled, and it wants to come home. Let's name what lives in the shadow. Not abstractly, but specifically. Because the shadow speaks in specifics, in the raw, unedited language of the psyche. Rage. Not anger, rage. The kind that wants to destroy, to burn down, to obliterate. The rage you felt as a child, when you were powerless and no one came. The rage you feel now when you're diminished, dismissed, unseen. But you've learned to smile through it, to be reasonable, to understand the other person's perspective until your own rage has nowhere to go but inward. This rage is in your shadow. And it's not pathological. It's the appropriate response to violation that was never allowed expression. It holds your boundaries. Your no. Your capacity to protect yourself. But you rejected it, so now it leaks out sideways, in passive aggression, in chronic resentment, in a cutting edge to your words that you tell yourself is just honesty. Greed. Not ambition, greed. The raw, unapologetic hunger for more. More pleasure, more power, more resources, more life. The greed you learned was shameful, especially if you were raised in scarcity or taught that wanting was evidence of spiritual failure. This greed is in your shadow. And it's not pathological. It's your will to live, to thrive, to take up space in the world. But you rejected it, so now it operates in the dark, in envy you won't admit, in a scarcity mindset you can't shake, in self-sabotage that keeps you small enough to be acceptable. Lust. Not desire, lust. The animal hunger of the body that doesn't care about appropriateness, about timing, about whether the object of desire is suitable. The lust you learned was dangerous, especially if you were shamed for your sexuality, or taught that the body was something to be transcended. This lust is in your shadow, and it's not pathological. It's your vital life force, your connection to the body, your capacity for pleasure and presence. But you rejected it, so now it shows up in fantasies that shame you, in attractions you judge yourself for, in a disconnection from your body that leaves you living entirely in your head. Despair. Not sadness, despair. The bone-deep recognition that life is suffering, that loss is inevitable, that everything you love will eventually be taken. The despair you learned was weakness, especially if you were taught to be positive, to look on the bright side, to never let them see you break. This despair is in your shadow, and it's not pathological. It's your capacity to feel the full weight of existence, to grieve, to let go. But you rejected it, so now it operates as chronic low-grade depression, as an inability to fully feel anything, as a spiritual bypassing that keeps you floating above your actual life. Shame. Not embarrassment, shame. The feeling that you are fundamentally wrong, broken, unworthy of love or belonging. The shame that arrived before you had language, that settled into your nervous system as a baseline state you've learned to call normal. This shame is in your shadow. And here's the paradox. Shame is both the wound and the guard at the door. It's what keeps you from looking at the shadow, because to look would be to feel the full weight of the shame you've been running from your entire life. But shame is also a liar. It tells you that what you're hiding is evidence of your unworthiness. But what you're actually hiding is your wholeness, the parts of you that are too powerful, too alive, too real to fit into the narrow definition of acceptability you were given. Now here's where it gets truly uncomfortable. Every person you judge with venom, every quality you condemn with unusual intensity, every weakness you despise in others, you are looking at your own shadow in a mirror. This is projection, the shadow's primary mechanism. You see someone being arrogant, and you feel a surge of righteous disgust. But look closer. What you're actually seeing is your own suppressed confidence, your own legitimate self-worth that you've crushed under the weight of false humility. You've made yourself small to be acceptable, and now you punish anyone who dares to be large. You see someone being needy, and you feel contempt. But look closer. What you're actually seeing is your own starved need, your own legitimate desire for connection that you've armored against because needing felt too dangerous. You've made yourself independent to survive, and now you judge anyone who admits they need something. You see someone being selfish, and you feel moral superiority. But look closer. What you're actually seeing is your own suppressed self-care, your own legitimate right to prioritize yourself that you've sacrificed on the altar of being good. You've made yourself endlessly available to others, and now you resent anyone who dares to have boundaries. This is the revelation that breaks people open. The world you see is a mirror. Every judgment is a confession. Every condemnation is a disowned part of yourself, projected outward so you don't have to face it within. But here's the paradox that makes integration possible. The very qualities you've rejected often contain your deepest power. The rage you buried holds your capacity for necessary boundaries. Without it, you're permeable, unable to say no, unable to protect yourself from violation. With it integrated, not acted out unconsciously but consciously owned, you have access to the fierce energy that says, "This far and no further." The greed you shamed holds your will to live fully. Without it, you settle for scraps, for less than you need, for a life that's safe but suffocating. With it integrated, you have access to the hunger that reaches for what you actually want, that takes up space, that claims your right to thrive. The lust you repressed holds your vital connection to the body and to life itself. Without it, you live in your head, disconnected from sensation, from pleasure, from the animal wisdom of the flesh. With it integrated, you have access to the life force that moves through you, that connects you to the present moment, that makes you fully alive. The despair you avoided holds your capacity to grieve, to let go, to accept the impermanence of all things. Without it, you cling, you resist, you suffer the additional pain of fighting what is. With it integrated, you have access to the wisdom that knows how to release, how to flow with loss, how to find peace in the midst of change. This is shadow work, not transcending these qualities, not spiritually bypassing them, not managing them or controlling them or making them more acceptable. Integrating them, bringing them home, allowing them to be part of your conscious awareness so they stop controlling you from the dark. But integration is not the same as acting out. This is crucial. Integrating your rage doesn't mean becoming violent. It means owning the rage, feeling it fully, and then choosing consciously how to express it, maybe through fierce boundaries, maybe through creative destruction, maybe through the courage to finally say what needs to be said. Integrating your greed doesn't mean becoming selfish. It means owning your hunger, your desire for more, and then choosing consciously how to pursue it. Maybe through ambition that serves something larger than yourself, maybe through the courage to finally claim what you need. Integrating your lust doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means owning your desire, your animal nature, and then choosing consciously how to express it. Maybe through embodied presence, maybe through creative passion, maybe through the courage to finally admit what you actually want. The shadow wants to be seen. That's all. Not acted out unconsciously, not repressed further, just seen, acknowledged, allowed to exist as part of the whole. And when you finally turn toward it, when you stop running, stop defending, stop pretending it's not there, something extraordinary happens. The shadow begins to transform. Not because you're trying to change it, but because consciousness itself is transformative. What was twisted in the dark begins to straighten in the light. What was frozen begins to thaw. What was fragmented begins to integrate. You discover that the rage you feared is actually fierce love protecting what matters. That the greed you shamed is actually life force claiming its right to exist. That the lust you repressed is actually presence fully inhabiting the body. That the despair you avoided is actually wisdom accepting what is. The shadow doesn't disappear. It becomes part of your conscious repertoire. You have access to its power without being controlled by it. You can feel rage without being consumed by it. You can feel desire without being driven by it. You can feel despair without being destroyed by it. This is wholeness. Not perfection. Not transcendence. Not the elimination of difficult emotions or uncomfortable truths. Wholeness is the integration of all of it, light and dark, acceptable and unacceptable, conscious and unconscious. It's the end of the war with yourself. The end of the exhausting performance of being only the good parts. And here's what nobody tells you. When you stop rejecting the shadow, when you finally allow it to be part of you, you stop projecting it onto others. The judgments that once consumed you begin to dissolve. The people who triggered you lose their power. The world stops being a battlefield of good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. You see people as they are, whole, complex, containing multitudes. Just like you. This is the beginning of genuine compassion. Not the false compassion of spiritual bypassing that pretends everything is fine, but the real compassion that comes from recognizing in others the same struggle you've faced in yourself. The same shadow, the same exile, the same longing to be whole. What if, instead of fighting these parts, instead of transcending them, instead of managing them into something more acceptable, what if you finally just let them come home? What if, in this moment, you simply stopped? Stop defending the story of who you are. Stop managing the image you present. Stop monitoring every word, every expression, every impulse to ensure it aligns with the persona you've spent a lifetime constructing. What if you just let go? Not as a spiritual concept, not as something you should do, but as an actual physical release. Feel it in your body right now. The shoulders dropping, the jaw unclenching, the belly softening, the breath deepening into spaces that haven't been breathed into for years. This is not surrender as defeat. This is surrender as relief. You've been holding something so tightly for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to not hold it. The effort has become invisible, the way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator until it suddenly stops and you realize how loud it was. The effort of being someone, of maintaining the constructed self, of keeping the shadow at bay, of performing the role, of defending the territory of your identity against anything that threatens to reveal it as the fiction it is. What if you stop defending? The boundaries of the self begin to soften, not as pathology, but as freedom, like ice finally returning to water, like a fist that's been clenched so long it's forgotten how to open, finally releasing. You are not losing yourself, you are losing the false self. And there's a difference. The false self is rigid. It has to be. It's a construction, and constructions require constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant energy to keep the walls from crumbling. The false self is exhausting because it's not natural. It's not organic. It's a performance that never ends. But the true self, the awareness beneath the performance, doesn't require maintenance. It simply is. Like the sky doesn't require effort to be the sky. Like water doesn't require effort to be water. Here's what's happening right now, in this moment, if you're allowing it. You're beginning to notice the space between thoughts. There's a thought arising. I am anxious. Notice it. Don't fight it, don't believe it, just notice it. There's a thought, and there's a space before the thought, and there's a space after the thought, and there's something that's noticing the thought. What is that? That's not a rhetorical question. Actually, look. What is the awareness that's noticing the thought? It's not another thought. Thoughts are objects of awareness. They arise, they pass, they're seen. But what's doing the seeing? This is the observer, the witness, the awareness that's aware of awareness itself. And here's what breaks everything open. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your persona. You are not even your shadow. You are the space in which all of this arises. The anxiety you've been identifying with, it's not you. It's a sensation arising in awareness. The depression you've been carrying, it's not you. It's a state arising in awareness. The persona you've been defending, it's not you. It's a construction arising in awareness. The shadow you've been avoiding, it's not you. It's a collection of rejected parts arising in awareness. And you, the actual you, are the awareness itself. This is not a concept to understand. This is a direct recognition. And it's available right now, in this moment, if you stop trying to grasp it and simply notice what's already here. There are sensations in the body. Can you feel them? The pressure of your body against the chair. The temperature of the air on your skin. The subtle movement of breath. Now notice, there's something that's feeling these sensations. What is that? There are sounds. Maybe traffic outside. Maybe the hum of electronics. Maybe silence. Now notice, there's something that's hearing these sounds. What is that? There are thoughts. Maybe analyzing these words. Maybe resisting them. Maybe trying to understand. Now notice, there's something that's aware of these thoughts. What is that? You can't find it by looking for it, because it's what's doing the looking. You can't think your way to it, because it's what's aware of thinking. You can't achieve it, because it's already here. It's been here the entire time. It's what you are beneath every layer of identity, every story, every construction. This is what the mystics point to when they talk about the true self. What Buddhists call Buddha nature. What Hindus call Atman. What Eckhart Tolle calls presence. What Ramana Maharshi called the I Am. It's not a special state you have to attain. It's the ground of your being that's always already here, obscured only by your identification with the contents of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. And when you rest here, even for a moment, something extraordinary happens. The problems don't disappear. The shadow doesn't vanish. The persona doesn't dissolve into nothingness. But your relationship to all of it shifts fundamentally. You're no longer identified with the anxiety. You're the space in which anxiety arises and passes. You're no longer identified with the depression. You're the space in which depression arises and passes. You're no longer identified with the persona. You're the space in which the persona operates as a useful tool, not a prison. And you're no longer at war with the shadow. Because you recognize that the shadow, too, is just content arising in awareness. It's not who you are. It's something you're experiencing. And from this recognition, integration becomes possible in a way it never was before. This es ego def, not the dramatic, psychedelic dissolution that gets talked about in spiritual circles. The quiet recognition that the ego, the separate self, the defended identity, the constructed I, is not what you are. It's a function, a useful function, like your hand is a useful function. But you are not your hand, and you are not your ego. You are the awareness in which the ego arises, the space in which the separate self appears and disappears, the consciousness that remains when every identity is stripped away. And from this space, everything changes. The fear that's been driving you, the fear of not being enough, of being too much, of being seen, of being invisible, of being rejected, of being consumed, all of it is based on the belief that you are the separate self, that you are the persona that needs to be defended. But if you're not the persona, what is there to defend? If you're the space in which the persona arises, then the persona can be whatever it needs to be in any given moment. It can be confident or vulnerable, strong or soft, visible or invisible. It's just a tool, a way of interfacing with the world. It's not your identity. And the shadow, the parts you've been running from, they're not threats to your survival. They're just more content arising in awareness. Rage arises. Greed arises. Lust arises. Despair arises. And they pass, like weather moving through the sky. You are the sky, not the weather. The sky. This is the peak moment. The moment when the vastness recognizes itself. When the drop realizes it's the ocean. When the wave understands it's the water. You are both infinitely small and infinitely large. Both nothing and everything. Both the individual expression and the totality expressing itself. For just an instant, the boundaries dissolve completely. There is no inside and outside. No self and other. No observer and observed. Just this. Just presence. Just the raw, unmediated experience of being. And it's not blissful necessarily. It's not peaceful in the way you might expect. It's too vast for those labels. Too immediate. Too real. It's like standing at the edge of the ocean and suddenly recognizing that you are the ocean. The terror and the ecstasy are the same thing. The dissolution and the expansion are the same thing. The death and the birth are the same thing. But you can't stay here. Not in ordinary consciousness. Not in a body that has to navigate the world of form, of time, of relationship, of responsibility. So you return. The boundaries reform. The sense of separate self reconstitutes. The persona comes back online. But something has shifted. You've seen behind the curtain. You've recognized what you are beneath the costume. And you can never fully forget it. The body breathes. The heart beats. Sensations arise and pass. Thoughts come and go. Emotions move through like weather. And you are here. You have always been here. Not as the constructed self, but as the awareness that's aware of the constructed self. This is presence. Not a state to achieve, but the ground of being to recognize. And from this recognition, life continues. But differently. You still have a personality. You still have preferences, opinions, reactions. You still have a shadow that needs integration. You still have wounds that need healing. You still have a persona that interfaces with the world. But you're no longer identified with any of it. You're no longer defending it as if your survival depends on it. You're no longer at war with the parts of yourself that don't fit the image. You're just here, present, aware, allowing it all to be as it is while it's here, and allowing it to pass when it passes. This is freedom. Not the freedom from difficulty, but the freedom within difficulty. Not the freedom from pain, but the freedom to feel pain without being destroyed by it. Not the freedom from the shadow, but the freedom to integrate the shadow without being consumed by it. The dissolution phase is not the end. It's the turning point. The moment when the old way of being dies and the new way becomes possible. But the new way is not a destination. It's a practice. A moment-by-moment return to presence. A continuous recognition of what you are beneath what you think you are. And it begins here. Now. In this breath. In this moment of awareness aware of itself. You are not the story. You are not the persona. You are not the shadow. You are not even the witness. You are the awareness in which all of this arises. The space. The openness. The presence. And you have always been this. You will always be this. Even when you forget. Even when you get lost in the story again. Even when the persona reasserts itself and the shadow demands attention. Beneath it all, you are here. Unchanging. Unborn. Undying. This is what you are. The recognition is not the end. It's the beginning. You've seen what you are beneath the constructed self. You've touched the awareness that's aware of awareness. You've felt the dissolution of boundaries, the expansion into something larger than the separate self. And now you're back. In a body. In a life. In a world that still demands navigation, relationship, choice, action. This is where the real work begins. Because here's what spiritual bypassing gets wrong. It mistakes the recognition for the completion. It thinks that once you've seen through the illusion of the separate self, the work is done. That you can just rest in awareness, and everything else will take care of itself. But you still have a shadow. You still have wounds. You still have patterns carved into your nervous system by decades of conditioning. You still have a persona that operates automatically in situations of stress or threat. The recognition doesn't erase any of this. It just changes your relationship to it. You're no longer identified with the shadow, but the shadow still needs integration. You're no longer identified with the wounds, but the wounds still need healing. You're no longer identified with the patterns, but the patterns still need conscious rewiring. This is the work of embodiment, bringing the recognition into the body, into relationship, into the messy, complicated reality of being human. Integration is not a one-time event. It's a practice, a daily, moment-by-moment choice to turn toward what you've been avoiding, to feel what you've been numbing, to acknowledge what you've been denying. It starts with the body, because the body holds everything the mind has tried to forget. Every suppressed emotion is stored in tissue. Every rejected part of yourself is held in tension. Every wound is encoded in your nervous system's response patterns. You can have all the insights in the world, but if you're not in your body, if you're not feeling the sensations, if you're not allowing the emotions to move through, the insights remain abstract. Intellectual understanding that never touches the ground of your actual experience. So you begin with sensation, with the simple practice of noticing what's happening in your body right now. Not trying to change it, not trying to understand it, just feeling it. The tightness in your chest, the knot in your stomach, the tension in your shoulders, the clenching in your jaw. These are not just physical sensations. They are messages, emotions that haven't been allowed to complete their cycle. Parts of yourself that are trying to get your attention. When rage arises, and it will arise because you've been suppressing it for decades, you don't act it out. But you also don't suppress it again. You feel it, in your body. The heat, the energy, the impulse to destroy. You let it be there. You breathe with it. You give it space to exist without needing to do anything with it. And something extraordinary happens. When rage is allowed to be felt fully, without judgment, without suppression, without acting out, it transforms. The raw, destructive energy becomes something else. Fierce clarity, necessary boundaries, the capacity to say no with your whole being. This is integration. Not eliminating the rage, but allowing it to be part of your conscious repertoire. You have access to its power without being controlled by it. The same with greed. When the hunger arises, for more pleasure, more resources, more life, you don't shame it. But you also don't let it drive you unconsciously. You feel it. You acknowledge it. You let it inform you about what you actually need, what you're actually hungry for. And the greed transforms into healthy ambition, into the will to thrive, into the capacity to claim your space in the world without apology. The same with lust. When desire arises, raw, animal, unconcerned with appropriateness, you don't repress it. But you also don't act on every impulse. You feel it. You let it connect you to your body, to your aliveness, to the life force moving through you. And the lust transforms into embodied presence, into creative passion, into the capacity to be fully here, fully alive, fully in your body. The same with despair. When the weight of existence presses down, the recognition that everything is impermanent, that loss is inevitable, that suffering is woven into the fabric of life. You don't bypass it with false positivity. But you also don't let it collapse you. You feel it. You let it break your heart open. And the despair transforms into wisdom, into acceptance, into the capacity to grieve, to let go, to find peace in the midst of impermanence. This is shadow integration. Not transcending these energies, but bringing them into consciousness, allowing them to be part of the whole. Accessing their power without being possessed by them. But integration is not just an internal process. It's relational, because the shadow doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone you interact with. Remember, every judgment is a projection. Every intense reaction is a disowned part of yourself appearing in the mirror of another person. So integration requires you to take back your projections, to recognize that the qualities you condemn in others are qualities you've rejected in yourself. To stop making other people responsible for carrying your shadow. This is humbling work. It requires you to look at your judgments and ask, what am I seeing in them that I refuse to see in myself? The arrogance you judge in your colleague, is it your own suppressed confidence? The neediness you despise in your partner, is it your own starved need for connection? The selfishness you condemn in your friend, is it your own rejected right to prioritize yourself? When you take back the projection, something shifts in the relationship. The charge dissipates. The person stops being a trigger and becomes just a person, complex, flawed, human. Like you. This is the beginning of genuine relationship. Not the false harmony of two personas performing for each other, but the real intimacy of two whole people, shadows and all, meeting each other without pretense. You stop needing your partner to be only the good parts. You stop needing to be only the good parts for them. You can show up as you actually are, messy, contradictory, containing multitudes, and allow them to do the same. This is terrifying, because it means being seen. Not the curated version of yourself, but the actual you. The you that contains rage and greed and lust and despair. The you that's still wounded, still healing, still learning. But it's also liberating, because you're no longer performing. You're no longer managing an image. You're no longer exhausting yourself trying to be acceptable. You're just here, present, real. And that's enough. Integration also requires you to make amends. Not in the formal 12-step sense, though that can be part of it, but in the sense of acknowledging the harm your unconscious shadow has caused. Because when the shadow operates unconsciously, it hurts people. Your suppressed rage leaks out as passive aggression that wounds those closest to you. Your denied need emerges as manipulation, as subtle ways of getting others to take care of you without having to ask directly. Your rejected selfishness shows up as martyrdom, as giving endlessly, and then resenting people for not appreciating it enough. You've hurt people, not because you're bad, but because you were unconscious, because you were operating from the shadow without knowing it. Integration means acknowledging this, not with shame. Shame just keeps you stuck. But with honest recognition. I see now how my unconscious patterns affected you. I see the harm I caused. I'm sorry. This is not about self-flagellation. It's about taking responsibility, about recognizing that your inner work has outer consequences, about choosing to be conscious going forward. And here's what's crucial. Integration is never complete. You don't arrive at a place where you're fully integrated and the work is done. Because you're alive. You're growing. You're encountering new situations that activate new parts of your shadow. The work is ongoing. A continuous practice of noticing, feeling, acknowledging, integrating. A moment-by-moment choice to stay conscious, rather than slip back into automatic patterns. Some days you'll succeed. You'll catch yourself projecting, and take it back. You'll feel the shadow emotion, and integrate it consciously. You'll show up as presence rather than persona. Other days you'll fail. You'll get triggered and react unconsciously. You'll project your shadow onto someone, and believe your judgment is truth. You'll slip back into the old patterns, the old defenses, the old ways of being. And that's okay. This is not about perfection. It's about awareness. About catching yourself more quickly. About being willing to look, to feel, to acknowledge, to adjust. The practice is simple, but not easy. When you notice a strong judgment arising, pause. Ask yourself, what am I seeing in them that I refuse to see in myself? When you notice a strong emotion arising, pause. Feel it in your body. Give it space to exist without needing to act on it or suppress it. When you notice yourself performing, pause. Ask yourself, what would it be like to just be here without the mask? When you notice yourself avoiding something, pause. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I look at this directly? These pauses are the practice. These moments of conscious awareness interrupting the automatic patterns. These choices to feel rather than numb, to acknowledge rather than deny, to integrate rather than reject. And slowly, over time, something shifts. The persona becomes more flexible. The shadow becomes less frightening. The emotions become less overwhelming. The judgments become less intense. You're not transcending your humanity. You're becoming more fully human, more whole, more real. You can feel the full range of emotions without being destroyed by them. You can access the full range of your nature, light and dark, acceptable and unacceptable, without being controlled by it. You can show up in relationship as you actually are, not as you think you should be. This is freedom. Not the freedom from difficulty, but the freedom to be with difficulty without fragmenting. Not the freedom from pain, but the freedom to feel pain without making it mean something about your worth. Not the freedom from the shadow, but the freedom to integrate the shadow as part of your wholeness. And here's what nobody tells you about this work. It makes you more compassionate. Not in the abstract, spiritual sense. In the concrete, embodied sense. Because when you've faced your own shadow, when you've integrated your own rejected parts, when you've taken back your own projections, you stop judging others so harshly. You recognize in them the same struggle you've faced in yourself. You see someone acting out their unconscious rage, and instead of condemning them, you recognize the pain beneath it. You see someone trapped in their persona, and instead of judging them as fake, you recognize the fear that keeps them performing. You see someone projecting their shadow, and instead of taking it personally, you recognize the unconscious pattern playing out. This doesn't mean you tolerate harm. It doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean you excuse destructive behavior. It means you see people clearly, as they are. Whole, complex, containing multitudes, just like you. And from this seeing, genuine compassion becomes possible. Not the false compassion that pretends everything is fine, but the real compassion that acknowledges suffering, that recognizes the shared human struggle, that extends understanding without requiring perfection. This is the completion of the work. Not in the sense of being finished, but in the sense of coming full circle. You began fragmented, split into acceptable and unacceptable parts, conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow. You've journeyed through recognition, discomfort, encounter, dissolution. And now you're returning to wholeness. Not the unconscious wholeness of the infant, who hasn't yet learned to fragment, but the conscious wholeness of the adult who has fragmented and chosen to integrate, who has faced the shadow and brought it home, who has died to the false self and been reborn as presence. You are here, in a body, in a life, in a world that still contains suffering, still demands navigation, still offers both beauty and pain. But you're here differently, more fully, more consciously, more whole. And that changes everything. The breath continues, in and out, the ancient rhythm that's been with you since birth and will be with you until death. But now, perhaps, you're noticing it differently. Not as something you do, but as something that happens. Not as your breath, but as the breath moving through the space you are. This is the shift. From identification with the contents of consciousness to recognition of consciousness itself. From being the story to being the space in which stories arise. From being the persona to being the presence that witnesses the persona. The work we've explored here is not comfortable. It's not easy. It doesn't promise bliss or transcendence or the elimination of difficulty. It promises something more valuable, the end of the war with yourself, the integration of what you've rejected, the freedom to be whole rather than perfect. Shadow work is not a weekend workshop. It's not a technique you apply and complete. It's a lifelong practice of turning toward what you've been avoiding, feeling what you've been numbing, acknowledging what you've been denying. It's the courage to see yourself clearly, not just the parts you're proud of, but the parts you've exiled. Not just the light, but the darkness. Not just the persona, but the shadow. And in that seeing, in that integration, you become more fully human, more fully alive, more fully here. If this resonates, if something in you recognizes this as truth rather than concept, then the work has already begun. You can't unknow what you now know. You can't unsee what you've seen. The question is whether you'll continue. Whether you'll choose consciousness over comfort. Whether you'll choose wholeness over the familiar fragmentation. This channel exists to support that choice. To explore the depths of human consciousness, the shadow, the persona, the path to genuine awakening. Subscribe if you're ready to go deeper. If you're willing to face what most people spend their lives avoiding. Because the truth is, you're not broken. You never were. You're just fragmented. And fragmentation can be healed. Wholeness can be reclaimed. Presence can be recognized. It begins here. Now. In this moment. In this breath. You are the awareness in which all of this arises. You have always been this. You will always be this. Welcome home.